Well, hello again. I'm back. Despite what the doctors say with a use date in late December of 2021, I'm still here and plan to be here long afterwards. But reflecting on my alleged shortened longevity, it's made me think about the people who've had, at least to the extent that I can remember it, influence in my life. So going back to junior high school and high school, uh, but perhaps preceding that first by uh, a passionate act in the sands at a local beach. My parents created me. Yet they were always a little concerned about it because it was the first time they'd tried that sort of thing. And I'm pleased to say that their influence has clearly benefited me. I remember my father, before the Second World War, being able to provide the perfect gift for a birthday or a Christmas holiday with a subset of extraordinary skill in packaging and wrapping. He could make the simplest gift look super special. When he returned from the Second World War, not surprisingly, he was changed. He was very interested in modernizing the home that we lived in Altadena, 1180 Rubio Street. But he didn't know how to do carpentry. He didn't know how to do plumbing. He didn't know how to do cement work. But he knew how to read books, and so he taught himself. Then he discovered that he couldn't do it with two hands. He needed four hands. And there, in 1946, 47, maybe 48, was his firstborn child. And he demanded my complete attention. And he demanded perfection. I was unable to provide either. As a result, part of my early literature education included a military vocabulary that would make a sailor blush. If there was a term that could be used to condemn someone's behavior, my father hurled it at me. And it wasn't until he was in his 80s, where surprisingly I find myself these days, that he sort of backed off and we became really good friends. My mother, on the other hand, was always my fan, my supporter. I was the firstborn, and I think my brother and sister would agree, even though it's not fair, that I was her favorite. And she went out of her way to try and blunt or smooth over the gouges that father was making in my personality. And she taught me affection, passion, understanding, all of those good things. And so much of what I am today as a human being, I think really stems from my mother. So now back to junior high school. In those days, Pasadena was on a 6-4-4 plan. You went to 6 grades, which took you from the 8th grade through the 10th grade. Then you went to junior college for 4 years, the last 2 years of high school, and the first 2 years of college if you elected to take advantage of it. The first memorable thing I remember from high school was either the track coach at Elliott Junior High School, Harry Bartroff, or the track coach at Pasadena Junior College, Otto Anderson. They taught me how to hurdle. Otto had run as a high school student in an earlier Olympics and was regarded as a great mentor. Either in junior high or at PCC, I fell on a hurdle and walked off the track. Coach Bartruff or Coach Anderson approached me and said, if you're going to run on my team, you are never, ever going to walk away from a race. You will pick yourself up and you will finish the race. I don't care if you finish an hour later or a week later, you will finish the race. And that lesson has hung on to me all these years. The next group of influential people are dear, dear friends of my parents, such close friends that we wanted to call them by their first names, but that was not permitted socially. So they became what were called shirt tail aunts and uncles, so that we could call them by their first name if we preceded that with the word aunt or uncle. The Stickneys, Rudd Stickney and Lillian Stickney, come to mind. Aunt Lillian was a librarian, and the library was located next to the grammar school. And she taught a summer program in literature and created in myself and my brother and sister an extraordinary love of books. Uncle Rudyard Kipling Stickney, was a retired locomotive engineer. I assume that my parents got to know the Stickneys because Mother would have met Aunt Lillian bringing us to the library. Uncle Rudd taught Richard and me how to lift weights, which proved over the years to be extremely valuable. Then there was the Paylors, Kay and Dave Paylor. Dave was a Pacific Mutual employee. He was a scratch golfer. He and Auntie Kay were just marvelous friends. And we would have several family gatherings every year, which would include baseball games and foot races. And it wasn't until I was 16 that I was able to outrun God, I forgot his name. Auntie Kay's husband, Uncle Dave Paylor. They were just family. You know, that's the only way to describe it. In high school, I loved my math teacher. She taught me algebra, geometry, solid geometry, trigonometry. She was a great baseball fan, and so I would listen to the baseball game the night before class, come in and talk to her about baseball, and somehow she managed to teach me math. Later, when I tried calculus, it was a disaster, and I moved from an engineering major to political science. In junior college, there was a music teacher who taught us about classical music. Didn't teach us how to read music, just taught us how to recognize like the individual who created the music, the composer. And to this day, I think her name was Mrs. Stone. I have this incredible enjoyment from classical music. Somehow, I don't remember my high school or junior college football coaches as having motivated me to do anything but hit hard, get up, and hit hard again. I had to make a choice when I finished my sophomore year of college at PCC and looked desperately for a proper college to attend. My father reported to Frederick R. Kerman, a graduate of Knox College. In fact, he and his wife were graduates of Knox. And Fritz was at home recovering from a stroke, and I would go and visit with him from time to time. And he asked me where I was going to go to college. And I said, well, I was going to apply to Stanford, University of Virginia, and several other Shishi Eastern schools. And he said, have you ever heard of Knox College? And my father always taught me to tell the truth. So I told the truth. No, I had never heard of Knox College. He said, it's in Galesburg, Illinois. It's known as the Harvard of the Midwest. As a favor to me, apply to Knox and see what happens. I did. And immediately received literature on the college. And I had absolutely no interest in going to a 600 student college in southwestern Illinois, somewhere near Peoria, Illinois, where I think the Caterpillar factory was located, Caterpillar tractor factory. So I looked for a way to get out of it and wrote back to the director of admissions, David T. Robinson. Really enjoyed reading the material, but I notice you don't have scholarships for junior transfer students. I live in California, and I have a sister and a brother who will be following me to college, and it looks like it would be a bit expensive for my family to send me to Knox. By return mail, I receive an application to apply for a scholarship. By return mail, I am awarded a full tuition scholarship and asked to report early to play football. I wasn't sure how they knew I played football because I didn't think I'd put that in, but maybe I had. Well, it turned out that there was a Knox College club in Los Angeles. It had ceased operation during the Second World War because all of the men were in the military. And Fritz Kerman and two Los Angeles lawyers by the name of Prince, who were also Knox College graduates, controlled a very substantial fund of money. And I was awarded a scholarship to Knox College. That scholarship award led to the dean of the college at Knox contacting the dean of the University of Michigan Law School, and a full tuition scholarship to Michigan Law School followed in the fall of 1954. In those days, out-of-state students rarely were awarded full tuition scholarships to first-rank universities. Now we have to drop back just a couple of years to when I was 18. My father was unrelenting in his insistence that his children do not lie, cheat, or steal, and that we always told the truth. So on the occasion of my 18th birthday, I had a very wonderful date who had hinted that she might have a very special present for me if I took her to dinner on my birthday. I was not completely sure what she was talking about, but I thought, let's give it a try. So I returned home very late. To get to the front door, I had to walk up a flight of concrete steps Those steps were immediately below my father's sleeping porch. I came into the house, I came upstairs. My brother and sister rushed to my bedroom to find out if it had happened. And my father called to me. And I stood in the doorway to his sleeping porch. Behind me was the master bedroom where my mother was. I didn't know if she was awake or not. My father said, "This is extraordinary, son. You're out way too late. Your mother and I have been extremely concerned. What in the world kept you out so late?" Family rule: you shall not lie, cheat, or steal. Sir, I was having sexual intercourse for the first time. Thank you, son. Good night. And off to bed I went. The next morning, he stood at the foot of my bed and delicately inquired whether I had taken any precautions during this adventure. I allowed as how I had. Now, back to law school. When I graduated from college, my parents and my great aunt, Bessie E. Young, Bessie's maiden name was Macaulay. Her sister was my father's mother. Aunt Betty had the family wealth, and she had helped with the cost of my college education, and she had offered to help with my education, with my law school education. My parents and Aunt Betty drove in her 1950 Oldsmobile, which had 3,000 miles on it, to Galesburg, watched my graduation. We drove to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I toured the law school and met some of the faculty members. Then we drove to Detroit, where Aunt Betty took delivery on a brand new sky blue 4-door Cadillac sedan, which my parents promptly took possession of. And my father directed me to drive the Oldsmobile and Aunt Betty. We were going to drive from Detroit, Michigan, take a ferry across the Great Lakes, and drive across the United States, taking tours as appropriate. I had always been terrified of Aunt Betty. She had servants. She rang buzzers when we were eating meals at her house. There were things you couldn't touch, things you couldn't sit on. Well, I got to know her on this trip. And she said, I was known in the family for most of my life as Tiny. And she said, "Tiny, I'd like to use this trip to tell you a little bit about your father. He can be a real butt." Well, I had never heard anyone criticize my father. Only on occasion did I think I heard my mother let slip an inappropriate word when my father was misbehaving, shall we say. So I had this wonderful trip. And in some city, I got lost. I was following father. And I didn't know what to do. And Aunt Betty said, "Just pull over and park at the curb. Your father will find us." And I said, "Well, why will he do that?" She said, "Because I've got all the liquor in the trunk of the Oldsmobile, and he's not going to go without his evening cocktail." 5 minutes later, here comes Dad. And on we go. We get to Nevada. And it's night time. And Aunt Betty says to me, "Tiny, have you ever been to a house of prostitution?" And this is a very elegant woman magnificently dressed. I've known to be one of the best poker players in Los Angeles. And I said, no, ma'am, I haven't. She said, I didn't think your father would be smart enough to do that. So she takes me into a house of ill repute. And there are, not surprisingly, a number of very attractive young women lounging about. And pretty soon an older woman comes up and stops my aunt and says, can I be of help to you? And she said, I wish you could, but I don't think we should do it tonight. And she said, I just want my grandnephew to know that your place of business exists and that very lovely people can be found here. And with that, she turns around and she says, come on, Tiny. And back to the car we go. We go off to dinner, and I ask if I can have a drink. And I was allowed to have one. We did not at that time share with my parents what Aunt Betty and I had been doing. So she became a wonderful influence in my life, somebody I could really talk to who'd tell it to me straight. Then there was my mother's great aunt, Maudlina Young, who lived with us at 1180, who was constantly there helping and doing things and teaching kindness and just being a super friend. Tossed into this melange of people is my Uncle Ken Brown, my mother's brother. Uncle Ken went to Stanford, was a polo player, joined the Air Force in the early 1930s, was commissioned as a pilot, and flew the early Army Air Corps craft from Crissy Field in San Francisco. So I'm back at Knox College, and I'm a political science major. And the head of the department was Professor Charles O. Lerch. Fantastic man. Really encouraged me and made the experience at Knox and preparing myself for law school one of the most exciting things in my life up to that point. So off I go to law school. And Aunt Betty says, my podiatrist's parents own the Ann Arbor State Bank. I'll drop them a note and ask them to keep an eye on you. And sadly, I've forgotten the couple's name, but they were indeed incredible friends. And they often gave me their tickets to symphonies that were being held on the Michigan campus, which I gobbled up with great glee. I was a very successful college student. Rarely did I get anything other than an A. Law school was a whole different kettle of fish. I was not the brightest bear in the classroom. I wasn't the brightest bear in the park. I wasn't even bright. I was struggling. I was having the most difficult time. I asked this couple what they thought I ought to do. And they said, do you know Professor Burke Chartel? I did. I think he had awarded me with a D in my latest exam for criminal law. And they said, well, we'd suggest that you go see Professor Chartel. So I made an appointment with him and went to see him. It was just a few weeks before spring break. And I told him I was just devastated. I was not performing in the manner that I'd always performed. I couldn't understand. I said, I'm doing all of the assignments. I'm doing the assignments that are in the footnotes. I'm doing the extra reading that you recommend and that the other professors recommend. I just don't seem to be getting it. And he ran his fingers over his mustache and looked at me, and he said, do you exercise? I said, normally I run, but there just isn't time for that. I have to be studying. He said, yes, I can see that. And he said, do you like girls? Oh, I said, very much, sir. He said, well, do you date girls here at Michigan? I said, oh, Professor, I haven't got time for that. And he said, I see. I said, what are you planning to do during spring break? Said, I'm going to settle down. Maybe I could run a little, but I'm basically going to go back through my notes and see if I can grab this stuff. And again, tweaking the mustache. Well, when you've asked me what I think you should do, and I said yes. He said, I would suggest that you find some friends and carpool and go to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Before you leave, I suggest that you put all of your law books on the floor of your closet, close the door, and lock it. I want you to go to Fort Lauderdale. I want you to go out on the beach. I want you to meet some girls and do your very best to get laid. This man's been a professor of law for 30 plus years. He's the most terrifying man in a classroom I ever encountered. And I looked at him and I said, thank you, Professor Chartel. I'll give that some thought. So I did almost what he asked. I did go to Fort Lauderdale. I took some of my law books with me and I went to the library to study when I wasn't out on the beach playing cards. And I met a very attractive woman who was an airline stewardess. And she became my guide to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Our relationship was platonic, but extraordinarily delightful. I returned to law school and my grades went up. So I leave law school. I enter the military. I'm sent to Iceland. I'm a first lieutenant. And being the junior officer at the base, I get all of the least enjoyable assignments. One of them is being the legal advisor to various investigative boards who are performing duties for the command. The boards always consist of officers, nothing lower than a captain, and usually headed by a lieutenant colonel. My job was to take their report and edit it, and so I did this with zeal. And I mean, there were just so many things that this lieutenant colonel did wrong. And staff judge advocate, a lieutenant colonel from Tennessee, who taught me many, many life experiences, including never drink a bottle of Southern Comfort with a colonel from Tennessee, because you're never going to live through it. But I did. Well, he sat me down and he said, now, your report is absolutely spot on correct. But let's just think for a moment what this report is going to do for the career of the lieutenant colonel heading that board. You were his legal advisor. You didn't say anything during its proceedings. You didn't step in to catch or overrule the missteps that might have been made. He said, I think what you ought to do is rewrite this report as a sort of an outline of changes that it would be appropriate to make before submitting it. And I had a hard time getting it, but I did as he advised, and I met with the lieutenant colonel, and I went over it with him, and he said, Lieutenant Small, this is the first time in my life I've had a legal officer treat me with the respect that you have shown. I will make the adjustments to the report that you're recommending, and I very much appreciate you coming and telling me. And so I learned an incredibly valuable lesson about being a junior officer, having to critique senior officers. And I made a friend out of this lieutenant colonel for all of the time that I was stationed at Keflavik International Airport. It was a valuable lesson. Then on to Travis Air Force Base and Lieutenant Colonel Jack Durand, the finest military attorney I encountered on either active or reserve duty in the military. A strikingly competent man, a man with a wonderful sense of humor, and a man who would take his subordinates, give them responsibility, help them discharge that responsibility, review their work, and as a result, I got promoted to captain under Jack Durand. He retired from the Air Force, became a Superior Court judge in Solano County, and I became friends with his two sons and his daughter. I was the guardian of his eldest son when Jack was stationed in Japan and his son was going to the University of San Francisco. The just fabulous lessons. And maybe the last person to talk about would be my experience in the McCutcheon Law Firm. It was 1962. Fern had given birth to Scott, and I had gone to the hospital to visit Fern and Scott. But for reasons that were never completely clear to me, I was not allowed to visit them in person. I could only look at them through glass. And so there wasn't a whole lot that could be done other than to express my great appreciation for the delivery and the beautiful child and how much I loved them. And I said, what am I going to do now? Well, I had heard that there was a senior associate in the hospital, a woman by the name of Hazel Flagler. She was a senior associate at the McCutcheon Law Firm, and she was part of the team of attorneys who handled the clients of Robert Minge Brown. The firm was named McCutcheon, Doyle, Brown, and Ingerson. There was a partner by the name of Green, who was immediately under Bob Brown. Then there was Hazel Flagler. Then there was another associate who had clerked for the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and he walked on water. And then there was me. And I had heard that Hazel had suffered a stroke. She had been with the firm for many, many years, had been a dominant force in the firm during the Second World War when there were no male lawyers around, but she was never made a partner. A great shame for the McCutcheon firm. So I knocked on her door and she said, come in. And I came in and I said, hello, Ms. Flagler. I'm Max Small. I live on the 14th floor and I'm part of your team. And I came by to see my wife and my firstborn child and heard that you were in the hospital and thought I'd stop by and see you. And so we chatted and she seemed quite to enjoy it. And time goes by, and I'm ordered to her office, which is on the 15th floor. That's where God and the near gods lived. I'm on the 14th floor. I go up to see her, and she says, "Come in, Mac." And I say, "Yes, ma'am." And she says, "I'm sure you're aware that I've had a stroke. I'm right-handed, and it's taking me a long time to recover the use of my right hand. I'm a securities lawyer. I handle the sale of bonds, water company bonds. I handle the sale of $300 million worth of bonds to a syndicate of buyers. At the time I was talking to her, the firm had not yet formally changed its name, and it was McCutcheon Thomas Matthew Griffithson Green with an E. And she said, "If you would come to my office at lunchtime when I ask and sign the original opinion letters that has to be given to each member of the syndicate, and there could be 50 members of the syndicate, if you would come up and sign McCutcheon Thomas Matthew Griffithson Green 50 times whenever I ask you, I will, quote, look over your work before it goes to Bob," Bob being Bob Brown, end of quote. Well, this is like having a mentor fall out of heaven. Hazel was an extraordinary attorney, a lovely human being. She treated me with great respect. And I was, as far as I know, I was the only junior associate that she would ever accept a luncheon invitation from. And so she mentored my career at the McCutcheon Law Firm until I left after being there 7 years. And those are the people that I remember the most, outside of, obviously, of my parents, outside of my brother and sister, and outside of Mel Walsh Small, who has played a dominant role in my life since January of 1985. So that's kind of a thumbnail with, I'm positive I've forgotten a number of meaningful people. But those are the people who shaped my life, my character and my professional skills. And if you ever encounter their names, know that they are blessed by Mac Small Jr. Thanks so much for visiting with me. Bye-bye.